What is your favorite lesser-known fact about World War I or II? Story 1. The first planes used in World War I didn't have guns on them. They were exclusively used for reconnaissance. French and German planes would often fly near each other without incident. At some point, a pilot used their sidearm to try to shoot down an enemy pilot. There was a very short period where pilots would essentially do drive-bys in the air, shooting at each other with pistols. Even more strange was the Austrian, who thought the best way to destroy an enemy aircraft would be to lower a cable with an explosive at the end of it onto the top of their aircraft and then sever it, activating the fuse. As you can imagine, the enemy aircraft didn't stay perfectly still and it didn't work all that well. Story 2. Costa Rica forgot to make peace with the German Empire after World War I, and as a result was still at war with the German Empire, then the Weimar Republic, and finally Germany, until someone in 1945 noticed it and went, oops. An American assigned to convoy duty to the Soviet Union got stuck there and ended up being pulled into the Red Army, where he won a medal and met the leader of the Soviet forces, resulting in him having medals from the U.S. military and Soviet Union, as he classified on paper as a Soviet war hero. The USSR continued to invite him to war memorial events through the Cold War, even when politicians, etc., from Western countries were prevented. Story 3. The Japanese actually bombed the mainland United States using balloons. They built unmanned hydrogen balloons with bombs attached and launched them across the Pacific Ocean. The idea was that the wind would carry the balloons across the sea to North America, where they would land and the bombs would go off. Only a few actually made it there, but one of them resulted in the only American civilian deaths from enemy action during the war. Fugo balloons, meant to cause forest fires. The Japanese figured out how to use jet streams to send them to the USA. I guess they are kind of like the ocean currents of the sky. As the balloons lost altitude, a ballast sandbag was released so it would go up again. And it kept happening until only the bombs were left to be released above the USA due to the calculations. After the war, a family was having a picnic in the woods, found the fabric of the balloon, and a bomb exploded. Maybe the balloon wasn't supposed to have a bomb anymore, I don't know. Story 4. The United States had originally intended to drop 3 nukes on Japan instead of 2. The Japanese surrendered 4 days before the third bomb was to be dropped. Now that they were stuck with a perfectly good nuclear bomb, they decided to dismantle it and send its plutonium core for testing at a Los Alamos facility in New Mexico. This core would go on to be involved in 2 incidents where it ended 2 men and injured many more. After these incidents, it would gain its legendary name, the Demon Core. Also, the fact that those 2 cities were bombed instead of others was up to one man, H. Stimson, liking Kyoto, the primary target, since he has been there by chance for holiday 15 years earlier, and also a random cloud over Kukura, the secondary target. Story 5. This is where they introduced the first mobile X-ray units. They weren't small and portable like today. They were built into the back of vans, and the nurses drove around the battles X-raying injured people. They were so well respected that even enemy soldiers avoided attacking them. Unfortunately, most of the nurses eventually died of cancer and whatnot. Didn't know it was super unsafe to sit all day every day in the back of a radiation box. Story 6. Joe Medicine Crow of the Crow tribe was the last Native American to become a bona fide war chief. He accomplished the feat on the battlefield during World War II. There were 4 requirements. Touch an enemy without killing them, counting coup. Take an enemy's weapon, leading a successful war party, stealing an enemy's horse. During one battle, he turned a corner and came face to face with an enemy soldier. Not only did he touch him, but he disarmed him, thus fulfilling the first 2 requirements. He later led a successful war party on a Waffen-SS camp, where they stole 50 horses, singing a traditional Crow honor song as he rode off. This fulfilled the final 2 requirements. Story 7. General of the armies for the U.S., John Pershing was known as Blackjack Pershing, but it had nothing to do with gambling. One of his first commands was with the 10th Cavalry Regiment, one of the famous Buffalo Soldier Regiment. He was known as ANZAC before it was sanitized to Blackjack. He was an advocate for black soldiers, but decided to have black Americans serve in the French army instead of the U.S. Army out of fear of how white American soldiers would react fighting alongside their black countrymen. Because of this, the most decorated American unit of World War I, the 369th Infantry or Harlem Hellfighters, actually fought for the French army and not the American army. Story 8. I don't know how lesser known it is, since I picked it up in a Dan Carlin hardcore history episode, but he was asked which German army was better, World War I or World War II. I don't remember the specific answer to that, but he went on about how much the Germans actually hampered the effects of the army because they would promote more based on loyalty to the party, as how good you actually were at your job. This led to a lot of people at the top being extremely incompetent and a lot of wasted effort and resources. It's why you don't want to run an administration like this. Story 9, that there's an engine block from a Focke-Wulf Condor on the footpath outside a pub in County Kerry in Ireland. That there is a massive mine from one of the Allied offenses in World War I still out there, and no one knows where it is. Of the 19 mines laid with over 450 tons of explosives, 2 didn't go off. One went off in the 1950s after a lightning storm in Belgium. The other is still lost. That there is a Liberty ship which sank in the Thames estuary with over 1,400 tons of explosives on board, and it's still there. Its mast can be clearly seen. Story 10. Monopoly helped World War II POWs escape. Park Place, Boardwalk, and a hidden map with a secret escape route? For Allied POWs, during World War II, Monopoly games came equipped with real-life get-out-of-jail-free cards. During World War II, the British Secret Service hatched a master plan to smuggle escape gear to captured Allied soldiers inside Germany. Their secret weapon? Monopoly boxes. The original notion was simple enough. Find a way to sneak useful items into prison camps in an unassuming form. But the idea to use Monopoly came from a series of happy coincidences, all of which started with maps, smooth as silk. Maps are harder to smuggle than you might think. They fall apart when wet, and they make a lot of noise when unfolded. Allied officials feared paper maps might draw the attention of German troops, so they turned to an unlikely source for help: silk. Not only would silk maps hold up in all kinds of weather, but they'd also come with the life-saving benefit of being whisper quiet. To produce these silent maps, the Brits turned to John Waddington Limited, a company that had recently perfected the process of printing on silk and was already manufacturing silk escape maps for British airmen to carry. What else was Waddington known for? You guessed it, being the licensed manufacturer of Monopoly outside the United States. Suddenly, the popular board game seemed like the perfect way to get supplies inside German-run POW camps. At the time, the Germans were hard-pressed to get provisions to their own troops, much less to the Allied soldiers they'd captured. Story 11. There's this term, the Nuremberg defense. It got its name because so many mid- and low-level Germans used it to defend themselves unsuccessfully in the hearings after the war, that they committed atrocities because they were just following orders. So if so many people did horrible things because they found it easier to follow atrocious orders than to refuse, what happened to the guys who refused? It must have been horrible, right? Well, the thing is, mostly, they didn't. There are scattered reports of soldiers who refused to do horrible things, being quietly reassigned to other jobs, mostly by officers who understood what a big ask those orders were. There was no punishment or censure, and there was definitely no blanket policy for what to do with those who refused orders, because so few people did. It's important to note the attitudes of the time. People who refused illegal orders weren't punished, they were pitied, like a disabled man who lacked arms or legs or willpower to do what must be done. The real depressing fact was that there was no lack of people to do illegal actions. Many were eager, and there was competition for the privilege to do so, in order to attain status, promotion, or just outright exercise cruelty. Story 12. On the evening of April 13, 1945, 2 French-Canadian snipers silently advanced on the Dutch city of Zwolle. They had been ordered to gauge the size of the German garrison stationed there and to contact the Dutch underground. Shortly after midnight, Corporal Welly Arsenault was destroyed by enemy machine gun fire outside the city, and an enraged Private Leo Major rushed the German position. To avenge the death of his friend, he decided that he would single-handedly liberate Zwolle. And he did. Story 13. The U.S. Army evacuated General MacArthur out of the Philippines to Australia, and then surrendered the Philippines to the Japanese. The Japanese then rounded up the American, British, and Filipino soldiers and marched them in a deadly disaster called the Bataan Death March. to a Japanese concentration camp where they all remained until Japan surrendered. James Clavell, author of Shogun, was one of the British held in a Japanese concentration camp in the Philippines. Also, there were a group of women pilots during World War II in what was called the WASP program, Story 14. The Allies had broken the German codes and knew the Battle of the Bulge was coming. They left those green troops thinly spread on the front lines, knowing they would be wiped out and overrun, because they wanted the German forces to push in and create the Bulge. The Allied plan was to let the German forces advance and then pinch off the Bulge from north and south and trap the German troops and tanks. To some extent, the plan worked. While the Germans were able to pull back most of their troops, they did not have enough fuel to pull back most of their tanks, half-tracks, and trucks. This sacrifice of the green American troops was kept secret for decades because the public and the sacrificed soldiers and their families would have been furious if they had known the truth. Story 15. The UK, and likely other countries too, I would think, deployed Q-ships, which were designed to look like merchant shipping but had significant hidden weaponry. I believe the idea was that U-boats would see a lone merchant ship and surface in order to destroy it or force surrender with deck gunnery instead of wasting more valuable torpedoes. They sort of acted as bait, I suppose, only to be able to now lay fire down on an extremely vulnerable surface submarine. They employed all sorts of trickery to keep up the ruse, including flying different nations' flags, repainting the boat's name on the bow in the midst of battles, and not wearing military uniforms. My great-grandfather was on one, the HMS Paxton, that was sunk by a U-boat in May 1917. He and a handful of other crewmen drifted in life rafts off the coast of SW Ireland for quite some time before finding shore. Nearly a week, I believe. His son, my grandpa, told me he kept his own obituary in his wallet for the rest of his life, and that 10 months after the sinking, he had recovered from a fist-sized wound in his thigh, well enough to get back to plowing his fields near Southampton. Interestingly, the Paxton was originally laid down as the Lady Patricia. She was also the namesake of one of the more infamous Canadian regiments to fight in France, the PPCLI, and was the regiment I later served a part of my military career with, including 2 tours to Afghanistan. I like how that story kind of comes full circle for us. Story 16, the attack of the dead men. Some people know about it, some people don't. During the Battle of Osowiec in World War I, the German troops attacked with poison gas that crippled the opposing Russian forces. However, the Russian troops refusing to surrender managed to get back up. They were coughing up blood and their skin was badly burned by the gas. They used every last bit of energy and charged at the German troops. The sight of seeing men who were presumed dead was horrifying to the German troops that they retreated. The Russians, despite massive casualties, still held the fortress. Story 17. How level-headed the French resistance was to the Germans in World War II. They didn't take on the German in a head-to-head fight, but were constantly undermining them using every trick in the book. Spying, assassinations, sabotage. I have read a story of some Germans doing a farm-to-farm search in western France for downed English aircrew they knew were in the area, making their way back to England. The aircrew were in a barn being sheltered by the French resistance. The resistance saw the Germans coming and searching the barn. Using the element of surprise, they overpowered the Germans and captured them. They then had a meeting to decide what to do with the Germans they had captured. They thought they had 24 hours before they would be missed, so they made the car they drove and the Germans disappear that night. The aircrew moved on the next day and made it back to England with a story to tell of war, not always being fought on the front lines. Story 18. The Battle of May Island during World War I. A disastrous loss of Navy ships and seamen for Great Britain. Who was this battle against, you ask? A crack team of German U-boats? A surprise Navy attack by the Ottomans? Nope. The Battle of May Island were all self-inflicted casualties that happened during a catastrophic drill involving their K-class submarines. The K-class subs were the brainchild of the first Sea Lord, Sir John Fisher. It was the largest, fastest, most well-armed submarine of its time. It was also powered by steam. Steam, which at the time required a fire furnace. A fire furnace with a smokestack. A fire furnace with a smokestack that would need to work underwater. Anyway, they somehow got it working. And by working, I meant the entire crew wasn't drowned during the dive. And it was time to do fleet drills, because the K classes were meant to travel with the other Navy ships. which is also why they had to move faster than any other sub of the time, having to match the speed of 20 plus knots of the other Navy ships. And they decided to do this off the coast of May Island during a massive fog. Cue some miscommunication and blam. Submarines are crashing into their bigger cousins and each other. Sailors are dying left and right. And by the end of it all, out of the 9 submarines sent out, 2 sank and 3 were damaged. The only 2 Navy ships damaged were the Fearless, which was damaged beyond repair, and the Inflexible, which suffered minor scratches. 104 men lost their lives that day. So ashamed were the admirals and the government that they quickly moved to cover the disaster up. They denied it ever happened and threatened the survivors to keep their mouths shut. It wasn't until 1994 that the file was unclassified and released to the public. And it wasn't until 2004 that the victims got a memorial. What's worse, this did not deter the admirals from the K-class, and they continued to try to make them work. Did they finally find a way? Let me put it this way. While observing a test run, one sailor asked his superior, "Sir, is the craft supposed to submerge backwards?" Story 19. None of the powers that went to war in 1914 had metal helmets. Most of them adopted them in 1918, after a year of warfare, where sticking your head above a trench was often death. I say most because Russia never did. Even if they could manufacture them, which they couldn't, in large enough numbers, which they also couldn't, to make an impact, they had no way of getting them to the front. Another less than fun fact. Russia was such a mess in World War I that their units almost always had shadow units. What's a shadow unit? It's a guy with 8 to 10 rounds of ammunition whose job is to watch a guy on the battlefield, and when he perishes, the shadow picks up the gun and keeps going. Story 20. Between World War I and World War II, the Germans were just this tiny group of weirdos with roughly the power and authority they deserved, read as none. Nobody cared about them, and they were a joke. Things started to change when rich Americans like Henry Ford heard about them and decided they had the right idea, helping fund them and providing them with the means to consolidate power. Fast forward after years of paid propaganda campaigns and, oops, quite a lot of the country suddenly doesn't think they're weird freaks anymore. That's right, the Germans, known for being weirdly obsessed with crying about money and how it was destroying Germany, were the ones who destroyed Germany because they were getting a constant injection of money. Story 21. A letter from a Canadian soldier was read out in a documentary on World War I we watched in high school. It was about the Americans finally showing up. The soldier said they were cocky and wouldn't listen to the vets. They would march to the front being noisy, smoke in the trenches, and do all sorts of things to give their position away. He said his unit was only happy to get away from them as the Americans relieved them. It was an early lesson as a Canadian that Americans had always liked to think they were hot crap until business picked up. Story 22. I've got a couple. First up, because we just had ANZAC Day, the ANZAC retreat from Gallipoli. In order to not let the Turks know they were evacuating, the Australian and New Zealand troops devised a cunning plan. They played cricket in plain sight. In World War II, when U.S. troops were stationed in England, they were notably more racist than the Brits. Remember, segregation was still a thing in the U.S. They tried to segregate the pubs. The Brits did not take kindly to this, and the Battle of Bamber Bridge started, which resulted in 7 wounded, 1 dead. As an aside, the black U.S. troops stationed in the UK were so amazed at the treatment they got from the Brits, in a good way, compared to the crap they had to put up with from U.S. soldiers. A lot moved back there after the war because of it. Story 23. Kinda not really. The Soviet Union's Tsar Bomba thermonuclear bomb, tested in, I believe, 1961, detonated with a yield of 50 megatons. The light produced from it could be seen from over 600 miles away, and it shattered windows as far as 500 miles. Its shockwaves circled the Earth 3 times over. It was in fact so powerful that if you were to stack every single bomb or explosive of any kind used during the entirety of World War II from every side, including the only 2 nuclear bombs ever used in combat, Fat Man, Little Boy, and detonated it, the resulting explosion would be 10 times less powerful than what Czar Bomba exploded with. If you were to throw in all the bombs and munitions from World War I/II, it still doesn't match the amount of energy released in that one nuclear test. A single bomb, more powerful than everything used in both world wars combined. Just to add more, its mushroom cloud technically reached space. It was 3,600 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. an increase achieved in less than 20 years. It was supposedly initially designed to have a yield of 100 megatons, but was reduced to prevent excessive nuclear fallout. The crew in the Tu-95 that dropped the bomb had a 50% survival chance, and they knew it. At its full planned 100 megaton capacity, it would have measurably altered the Earth's rotation. Story 24. I'm mostly saying this to be corrected. During World War II, pre-1942, the USA told Axis and allied countries they would keep and protect their gold, while the crap hit the fan in Europe. A majority of this gold was never returned, and this is where it gets really controversial. Potentially funded Operation Beleaguer in 45, which really solidified the occupation of the Pacific Islands and allowed for a lot of showing off nuclear weapons. The intention seemed to have been global peace, but obviously that didn't work. The general belief, as far as I know, is that the US retained the gold and never returned it, saying that it was lost on boats during shipment, story 25. The scientists that built and tested the first atomic bomb calculated there was a small chance the bomb would cause a chain reaction in the atmosphere that would incinerate the entire planet. They set it off anyway, and we only built 3 atom bombs. One we tested, the other 2 were dropped on Japan, and would be a year before we had more. It was a big bluff that the Japanese did not call. Another year of fighting would have caused millions of more deaths as we carpet-bombed Japanese cities and invaded. I'm 70 years old, and my father-in-law was scheduled to be in the second wave to hit the beaches on the invasion of Japan. They created a sort of yearbook that showed the beaches of his landing. It was crescent-shaped with cliffs on all sides. They were expecting 50% casualties at a minimum. His brother, who worked in naval intelligence, told his mother and father not to expect to see him again.